Greetings, viewers. Eric the Car Guy here, back again with another live show where we answer your automotive questions live. And there are a couple of special things about today's event. The first of which is it will be an hour long, thanks to Advance Auto helping us out with that. Also, we have a special guest, Jim Bates, who will be joining me to help answer your questions. Now, a few things before I get started. First, I sometimes butcher people's names, and I want to apologize for that in advance. Second, if you are watching this via YouTube, I cannot see the questions being posted to the YouTube video. So unfortunately, I will not be able to answer the questions posted to the YouTube video after this concludes. Also, the questions I will be taking, so if you're wondering where to find them, you go to the Google Plus event on my Google Plus page, and you can post your questions there throughout the show, and we will do our best to answer as many as we possibly can. However, once the show concludes, we will no longer be taking any more questions, so we won't be able to answer those. However, the next show will be, let's see, today's the 12th, so it looks like the next show will be on August 26th. So look for us then. Outside of that, we want to once again thank Advance Auto. There will be special links from them in the description for stuff that they would like to share with you. But right now, I'm going to turn it over to Jim Bates, who is also an automotive expert. And Jim, could you tell us a little bit about your background?
Yeah, hi, Eric, and hi, everybody. Glad to be here. So the background is, some 40 years ago when I started playing with cars and mostly street racing and that sort of thing. I got a job in a gas station, actually, and learned a whole lot of stuff way back then. Then went on to auto parts stores and into the speed shop business. Actually did some racing for a living with some partners. We had a speed shop that supported the cars, really, and whatever we took home at the end of the week had to come out of the cash drawers. So then I got married, had to get a real job, and went on to work for a company called Eklund Manufacturing. And from there, I stayed with them quite a while, went on to Wells Manufacturing and stayed with them for 23 years, I think. And then I had a great opportunity to work with Advance Auto Parts to build training programs for their people that run the stores and their customers in the shops. And I've been doing that for about 15 years. And during that period of time, I've made about 250 videos with the folks at Advance Auto Parts on training. And so I continue to do that today. I produce training videos and YouTube videos, as a matter of fact, for my YouTube channel. And that brings us to where we are now. So I like to take the many years of experience and wrestling with engineers and broken cars and customers and all those things wrapped up together to try to help folks work on their projects and to see if the things that I've learned over the years may help them as well.
Is that broken customers or broken cars?
Both.
Well, also, I'm going to put a link in the description to Jim's YouTube channel so you can check out some of those videos he just mentioned. But Jim, are you ready? Are we ready to dive into some of these questions people have for us?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's see how we can help.
We have Janine Schaefer, has a 1998 Honda Civic LX. The key will not move from 0 to 1 going forward, but it will turn off fine. The car does not have an electronic chip key security. I tried changing the cylinder lock, but the new one did the exact same thing. Will I have to change the entire ignition switch with the cylinder lock, or is it something else? I'm a little confused by this one. I have known of problems with Hondas and their ignition lock cylinders. Sometimes the key just wears out and the key won't turn properly in the ignition lock, but there really isn't a whole lot to it. There's a mechanical section, and then there's also the electronic portion that's actually fastened to the back of that mechanical section. And I would think that if you're not able to turn it, it's either a problem with the key itself or a problem with the lock cylinder. And if you've already replaced the lock cylinder, I'm kind of at a loss. What do you think, Jim?
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing. The lock cylinder goes into the key mechanism itself. And so I think by replacing just the lock cylinder, and that doesn't seem to do it, and a lock cylinder comes with new keys, so I would imagine the key's probably fitting okay. But if not, you're trying to put an old key into a new lock cylinder, I don't think they come that way, but that could still be an issue. I think the whole mechanism probably has to be changed, the lock cylinder and the switch itself, and that will probably be required to solve that problem. That's what it seems like to me.
Right. You can also have a locksmith actually rekey the cylinder lock to work with your old key if you want to do it that way. But It usually takes the skills of a locksmith in order to do that. But as Jim mentioned, when you purchase a new lock cylinder new, it usually comes with new keys. Shall we move on to the next one?
Yeah.
We have British Leland, Alex Scott 100. He has a 2001 Chrysler Town & Country LXI with power sliding doors and power hatch. The hatch motor will not engage. To push the hatch up or down, we have replaced the little computer box in the back and put 7 different motors in. The power hatch will not work. Secondly, the power sliding door works fine, but when it goes to pull itself shut, you hear a pop noise and the motor runs until you manually open and close it. You want to start with this one, Jim?
Well, the thoughts I'm having here is that perhaps starting with the mechanism that actually moves the doors and that the motor is engaging. And a lot of the Chryslers that I have seen, and other vehicles too, rather than use some sort of a cable, it's kind of like a nylon chain, if you will, or a strap with a whole bunch of holes in it. And when you said it popped, it sounds to me, and I've heard that noise, where what engages the nylon strap is popping out of the hole. In other words, it's overrunning probably. And that may be one of the problems. Another, it could be an electrical problem caused by a switch. Probably the switch or the wiring itself. And I really think for this one, it may be a little bit of both. We have to look at that drive mechanism, the strap itself, and perhaps even try to operate these things, if you can, with the switch out of there, so you can just connect the wires together, you know, like the switch would do, and see if it makes any difference.
Yeah, it almost sounds like, well, I'm reading 2 different problems. One is with the hatch going up and down, or not going up and down like it should. And that, I think, could possibly be a switch problem. He talked about replacing the little computer box back there for that. But if that computer box isn't receiving a signal from the switch, then it's never going to perform any kind of function. As far as the sliding doors, I also just had the thought of, like, maybe they need a relearn procedure or something like that. May need to be told when full close and full open is, so that the motor knows when to stop working. You think there's any credence to that theory, y'all?
Yeah, when you said about the little computer box in the back, and that hit me, that sometimes you have to relearn these motors. Oftentimes there's a procedure to tell the motor what is up, what is down, what is open, what is closed. And all vehicles have a relearn procedure for that. And so usually they're quite simple, but you'll have to look into a service manual, perhaps like a Haynes manual or something like that. Not the owner's manual, but a vehicle service manual, to find out what the relearn procedure will be for those particular devices and motors.
Yeah, so there's a couple of different things, but it sounds like there's some investigation that needs to be done instead of replacing any more parts, just to verify that signals are coming out of switches like they're supposed to. Also look into that relearn procedure. That may involve a scan tool, I'm not sure, or it may just be some manual procedure that you go through. The service manual should have that information. You may be able to find that information online somewhere.
You know, that's a good point, Eric. Sometimes it does require a scan tool on some of these vehicles, yet on others, all it requires is, for instance, a power window regulator that comes to mind, where you just use the switch itself to run the window like halfway up, stop, and then all the way up and hold it for a few seconds. And that kind of tells the system what is up, what is halfway, and what is down. So, yep, check a manual. You may be able to do this yourself, or on the other hand, if it requires a scan tool that you don't have, you may need to get some help with that.
Yeah, you may be able to find that service manual information online someplace. Sometimes I've actually found service manuals either electronically or was able to purchase paper versions. Later model vehicles seem to go more towards the electronic way of doing things. I don't see too many paper manuals, service manuals that are going out these days. It seems that, you know, a lot of dealerships, a lot of car makers just seem to put everything into a database, and you farm information from that. Let's move on to the next one. We have Andy Pittman. Eric, love the show, and I've learned a lot from watching you. He has a 2000 Hyundai Tiburon, 139,000 miles. And my question is, about a week ago, I started to hear what sounds like a wheel bearing noise coming from my front passenger side. But when I turn the wheel right, like going around a bend, the noise goes away. I know my alignment is off and my tires are wearing unevenly, but I haven't heard it make the noise before. I'm using a different brand of tire than I normally do. Could that possibly be the sound I'm hearing and not the wheel bearing? Thanks so much, Andy. You want to start with this one, Jim?
Yeah, the short answer is yes. Probably, it could be very well still be a wheel bearing, but tires do make a lot of noise. And Eric, you and I talked about this before, and rotating the tires, something as simple as that you may do yourself, might cause a different noise and tell you that, yep, it's probably the tires making the noise. But if you do rotate the tires or change their positions and the noise is still there, then you do need to look at the hub or the wheel bearings.
Yeah, that's often what I recommend. If people come to me with a description similar to this, even though what he's describing does sound like a wheel bearing noise, I would still advise doing a tire rotation and doing exactly what you said. If the noise changes or goes away, then you know the issue is most likely a tire issue. But if it doesn't change and doesn't go away, then you're probably looking at a wheel bearing problem based on that description. Because you can oftentimes, and I did a wheel bearing video a little while back about jacking up one side of the vehicle and listening to hear the noise and then jacking up the other side of the vehicle. I used to do that when it was on a vehicle lift initially. So I would just use the brakes and I would take a pry bar and hold the brakes, apply the brakes on one side and the other side would spin. And if the noise was there, then I knew the problem was on that side. But many people brought up in the comments of that video that another way is just while you're driving down the road, you just sort of slalom back and forth. And if the noise goes away when you're turning in a particular direction, it's usually, I believe, the opposite side wheel that's at fault. Because when the vehicle is nosing into the side of the where the bad wheel bearing is, that's usually when it makes a noise. And then when you take the load off, that noise goes away. William D. Hello, Eric. I have a 2004 Maxima. I had the heads done in a shop, and after driving the car for a day, the engine light comes on with codes P0011 and P0021. What can I do? Thank you. I think I actually looked these codes up before the show started, and both of those codes are for cam advance. So I would say that when you put the thing back together, the cams are not back in their correct location, and therefore the timing is off, and that's why you're getting those codes. And it may also come with some performance issues as well. What do you think on that one, Jim?
Yeah, I go along with cam timing, and even if they started out being timed properly, if the cam tension or the adjuster was too loose or something, it may have changed the cam timing during that day or so, and now you're winding up with starting out well, but now you have this problem. Might go back and look at your cam timing.
Yeah, those V6, trying to get those V6 chains back on correctly and getting all those links lined up and everything can be tricky. So, you know, it's not uncommon to get them off, but it's one of those measure twice and cut once situations where, you know, check it, double check it. I've even gone so far as to rotate the engine by hand a full, you know, sometimes mostly 2 revolutions in order to get the timing marks to line back up. And once they do, and I'm sure that they are, that's when I commit and start putting things back together. Here's another one with lots of Nissan questions today. David D. I don't know if I mentioned the last question was William D, but this is David D. What is a good oil change interval for a 2012 Nissan Altima 2.5? Do you recommend full synthetic oil? Thank you, love the videos, and stay dirty. I'm sure we could talk about this kind of thing at length, but I'll let you lead it off, Jim.
Okay. The oil change interval is going to be whatever it says in the owner's manual. That's just a great rule of thumb. So let's just stop with that. But as far as the type of oil that you use, with higher mileage engines, you can use high mileage oil. Synthetic oil is good stuff. It will get into places that regular oil can't because the molecules are a lot smaller. So you can wind up with better cooling, as an example, because of heat transfer that the oil can offer, and sometimes better lubrication. But really, a synthetic oil or a blend of synthetic oil, whatever you choose is probably going to work really well for you. The amount of detergents that are in the oil are going to talk about or are going to give you more or less engine performance, you know, cleaning out the engine and keeping it clean, that sort of thing. That's all based on what the manufacturer puts in the oil. And so therefore, some people like one brand better than another because of things like that. So I think that probably the higher, how many miles do we have on this engine? Do we know, Eric?
Not stated.
Okay, so if it's a higher mileage, go with the high mileage oil. But as far as the change interval goes, stick right with what it says in the owner's manual. You just can't go wrong when you do that.
Agreed. And that's I'll fall right in line with, as far as the interval is concerned, your owner's manual should tell you what the interval is. And I think you might be surprised that it's a lot longer than what you may be used to. In fact, I know a lot of them, maybe 7,500 miles or more, that they recommend their oil change intervals. But they also say things like it depends on use, it depends on the environment. If you're in a severe environment, like let's say a lot of dust and a lot of heat or a lot of cold, they might have different oil change intervals based on that. But for the most part, the manufacturers spend a lot of time testing, trying to figure out exactly what interval exact. Here's the other thing: make sure you put the correct viscosity and don't like jump viscosity. If the manufacturer says put in 5W30, put in 5W30. As far as the synthetic side of things go, I run synthetics in my vehicles. I have vehicles with higher mileage, so I actually run high mileage oil, which is a synthetic type of oil. And it has a different additive package, so that it's got seal conditioners, things like that, so that it's designed to help prevent leaks and those types of things. But as Jim mentioned, sometimes there are instances where you might switch to a synthetic oil after running conventional oil for a period of time in an older, worn out engine, and it exacerbates the problem. It might start to burn more oil, it might start to leak. And I spent a lot of time talking to oil engineers in the past couple of years, and they really hate it when you insinuate that their oil is causing oil leaks. They don't like that at all. In fact, the only thing I could get out of them was that what would happen in those instances was that the synthetic oil would go in, the detergent package that's in there would clean out all the gunk that's actually sealing your engine. And as a result, that synthetic would begin to cause the engine to leak. Well, the synthetic's not causing the engine to leak. It just did such a good job, it started leaking as a result. So that's the most I could get out of moving with that. It's a 2012. It depends on the mileage. It depends on how well it's taken care of. I mean, engines that aren't well maintained, that may go a very long time between oil changes and maybe abused a lot, maybe run low on oil, those would be candidates for things with problems with synthetic oils. Other than that, if you ran a synthetic oil, particularly a high mileage oil, you might be happy with the results. So that's kind of a subjective thing, up to you, and take a look. Maybe just take off the oil cap and see if there's a bunch of gunk down inside your engine. If there is, I would avoid the synthetic oil. But if it looks nice and clean, go for synthetic. Let's move on to the next one. Eden Eric. Hey, Eric. Let's see. I have to hit the read more thing here. Thanks. We always thanks you for having you with us. This is going to be fun. My 2008 Nissan Altima, another one, 2.5, pulls its driving wheel to the driver's side when I step on the brake. It doesn't happen every time. I feel it mostly when stopping from 30 to 0. Is it because of lug nut got tightened too much, or the car has a brake caliper problem? Caliper problem is, I think, what he means. I also have a lug lock nut. I can't have it loosen. Is there any way to get it loosened, or that your way you showed of your way? Actually, I like the way, but I think that is the thing I should not get involved with due to my experience. Does tightening over the lug nuts help me do that? What other ideas do you have? Thanks for your helps, and you make many young people like me more confident to get under the hood of their cars. Okay, I think I'm going to interpret this a little bit. It sounds like there's a couple of issues here. The first is when he brakes, the car pulls to one side from 30 to 0. That happens sometimes. And I think that his question is it because the lug nuts, or a lug nut in particular, is too tight? And thirdly, I think he's asking, he has a locking lug nut, and he's unable to remove that. And if that's too tight, can that cause the vehicle to pull? Now, I'm just going to come right out and say that, over tightened lug nuts are not going to cause the vehicle to pull to one side or another. That's going to be a braking problem. And the fact that it happens intermittently, I would look at the calipers, but I wouldn't necessarily suspect the caliper itself right off. I would check the caliper slides and make sure the caliper is moving correctly. I've done some videos on servicing brakes. I'll post a link to that in the description. I'll also post a link in the description to the removing lug nut video that I have, which in summary, I take an old socket and hammer it onto the wheel lock and use a breaker bar to break the lug nut loose from the wheel, which often works. And I don't think you have to worry about your lack of experience there. You just have to try to find just the right size socket. I recommend 12 points, by the way, over 6 points for doing that type of thing. But over tightening wheels, no. But I would recommend you take the front wheels off and get a look at the brakes. Actually pull the caliper apart, take a look at the brake pads. A lot of times you'll see either uneven wear on the brake pads or like a lot of wear on the inside pad and not a whole lot of wear on the outside pad. And this usually indicates that, like I said, those caliper slides, that every time you release your foot off the brake pedal, that brake caliper needs to be able to release and move away. If it doesn't, then it can hang up and sometimes break prematurely or possibly cause the kind of things that you're talking about. You have stuff to add to that, Jim?
Actually, I just want to say that caliper sliders that aren't lubricated is a very, very common problem. It's one of those things that people don't really think about or know that they should do. And that was the first thing I thought of. But you had just nailed it on that. The other thing, I like your suggestion about using an old socket. But I did receive not too long ago a set of keys for lug nuts, and I found out that a lot of tire shops have these things. And so in other words, if you've lost maybe that's the problem, is lost the key and can't get it into the locking lug nut, there are some tire stores that have these sets and they can take it off for you. So that might be something to consider.
Yeah, there are master sets that are out there, but it depends on the brand of wheel locks. They won't cover everything. They also make special sockets and special tools just for doing this very thing. But those may be, difficult to find, or like you said, you may contact a tire shop on that. My socket method was just, maybe something you had in the toolbox that might help you out to get you out of that jam. But as far as the caliper slides, Jim, just gonna pick your brain a little bit. What do you use to lubricate those with?
Usually a white grease, a molybdenum type of a grease works really well. Yeah, just a white grease. You got to have a grease that's going to stay there and it's not going to melt. And that's where a lot of those white greases come in really handy.
I'm going to disagree with you on that, Jim.
What do you like?
Silicone paste only. And the reason I say that is because anything petroleum based, such as a lithium grease, I've seen basically corrode or degrade the rubber boots on the outside because those boots are also petroleum based. So I try to go for silicone instead of grease for that very reason. Also, I've seen grease over time tends to like harden up or just sort of dry out, whereas the silicone paste doesn't seem to do that. And I also believe a lot of manufacturers from the factory use the silicone-based lubricants on those caliper slides for those reasons, because they handle the high temperatures well and they don't cause any problems with the boots on the slides.
Wow, you make a very, very good point. I hadn't really thought about that a whole lot. I think probably the greases that I'm talking about, yeah, they will dry out, but they don't usually dry out within the normal interval of replacement, so I haven't really seen that. But wow, I really like your idea about the silicone-based grease. I think I'm going to look into that, and maybe I'm going to start using that stuff myself.
Well, also the other thing is, if there's silicone in there to begin with and you start mixing it with petroleum, there could be like a chemical something that happens between those two things, and it could have an adverse effect. So I've always just stuck with silicone, and I've never gotten into trouble with that. But I do see that a lot. I do see people use grease a lot, and sometimes even anti-seize, which I'm strongly against using anti-seize on caliper slides. But yeah, I've got a video on it, and I was just curious. I sort of led you into that, and I apologize for that little trap that I set for you, but I was just curious as to what your experience had.
Oh, that's quite all right. That's quite all right. Hey, that's why you're Eric the car guy. We can all learn something from you.
I made some videos and people watched them. That's what made me Eric the car guy. Other than that, well, it's all self-proclaimed, I suppose. All right, but we'll leave that one. But basically, he's got to go and check out his calipers, in particular. Check out those caliper slides and make sure they're moving correctly.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's the place to start with that issue. As far as the lug nuts, we talked about that. You've got options there. As far as them being too tight, you can use a torque wrench. Usually, a lot of lug nuts usually fall within about 80 foot-pounds. So if you want to avoid that issue, you can bust out the torque wrench and just run everything down snug, and then you can tighten them the rest of the way with a torque wrench, and that way you'll have everything all on the level. Because if you're over tightening the lug nuts on some, especially newer vehicles with the, well, especially newer vehicles, if you over tighten the lug nuts, you can actually cause a brake pulsation by doing that, because it'll actually warp the head of the rotor, and you can develop a brake pulsation as a result of lug nuts that are too tight.
Yeah, and and I want to mention something else too, Eric. There is something, and I don't know how much that would be in play here, but there's something called rotor thickness variation that can occur over time. That can cause some pulsing, some warpage, and I'm not really sure it causes this particular problem, although it may add to the symptom, and that is due to rust buildup and stuff in between the wheel and the drum or the rotor, depending on what you have, and it builds up over time. And so now you put the thing on, and it's not exactly flat all the way across the rotor. So there's a little tool that you can put on the end of a drill, to clean all that up. And I just did a video, or put a video together on that. I was thinking about posting it next Wednesday, and but it'll be up there eventually. You guys can see what I'm talking about.
Did 3M make those little cleaning tools you're talking about?
Yes, they do.
And in fact, I have a set of those that I have not used, but I know exactly what you're talking about. But anytime I machine a rotor or anything like that, I'll clean the hat both inside and out, just to make sure that it mounts flush to the machining equipment, the brake lathe that I'm using. Also, when you put it back in the vehicle, it should sit flush. But also the hub you have to consider, because like you said, the rust on the hub will also cause the rotor not to sit on there properly, and could cause, like you said, that run out. That could cause an issue. But seems to me that would cause more of a pulsation issue than it would like the vehicle to pull to one side or the other, though.
True, very true.
But definitely something to consider, as long as we're on the subject of brakes.
Mm-hmm.
We are at the halfway point, and I'm going to once again thank Advance Auto for making this an hour-long show instead of my normal half-hour shows. So we're going to go for another half hour. So if you still have questions, keep bringing them, and we will do our best to answer them. Once again, we are going to, Jose Morales has a 2006 Honda Civic LX. Every time I step on the gas, I hear a clunk in the back of my car. I took my car for a wheel alignment. The mechanic told me that the camber is a little bent, and that would be a problem. The clunk that I hear is or something else. So I guess he's asking if the clunk is related to an alignment issue as far as the camber, or do we think it's something else? You want to start with this one, Jim?
I think we think it's something else. I mean, it comes to my mind, it could be a sway bar bushing or something, that's loose and banging away. It could be something like that. But if it's coming from the rear, I'm thinking it's more chassis related than it is alignment type related.
Yeah, alignments cause uneven tire wear. Alignments don't necessarily cause noises or things of that nature, unless that they cause a tire wear problem that does create a noise. And I have seen that in the past, but not a clunking noise. But what could be causing the clunking noise could also be affecting the camber. So perhaps you have a bushing or something in the back, as Jim suggested, that's worn out, causing that clunking noise. But I'm going to add one more thing to that. Exhaust hangs on rubber hangers. And if, say, you have like maybe an engine mount that's getting old or worn, it can cause the entire exhaust system to move around. And when it does that on those rubber hangers, it could come in contact with something and make a clunky noise. Also, something else, check your trunk. If you've got stuff inside your trunk, like a bowling ball, and you go to take off, that's going to roll around and hit something in the back. And I've had customers come in with similar complaints. I open up the trunk and it's full of stuff, and sometimes stuff that's loose and goes around. So, I mean, don't ignore the obvious. Always start with the simple stuff. Like look and see if there's something in the back of your car that might be rolling around and making that noise. But then also, you can take the exhaust and sort of move it around by hand and see if it is coming into contact with something. I've seen sometimes aftermarket exhaust systems are also bent a little different. So there's always going to be a little bit of movement to the exhaust, but if it's not bent the same way as the original equipment system was, it could come into contact with different parts of the vehicle and possibly make the noise that that you mentioned there. So there's a few things to check, but start with the simple stuff is what I would recommend. But as far as alignment, forget about that causing a problem, but it's something you should address if you want to keep the tires that you have on your car in good shape.
Yeah, I just want to add too that of course with a cold exhaust system, you can grab a hold of it and wiggle around like you said, but also when you have other chassis parts that you can grab a hold of and pull and push on, you'd be surprised what you can discover when there's a worn bushing involved. It's very apparent. You'll see it and you'll hear it right away.
Another thing that also indicates a worn bushing or a worn part on the suspension system is I often find a layer of orange dust around the part that's starting to get loose. So you can sort of tell that metal contact is happening. If you just look around bushings and areas like that, if you see some orange dust around that area, that could indicate a loose component there. Should we move on, Jim?
Yeah, what's next?
Andrew Nyugan has a 2007 Honda Accord. At night, he noticed that his headlights dim when he's using his power windows. Is this normal? If not, what could be wrong? Really enjoy your videos. Keep up the great work. Cheers, Andrew. Thank you, Andrew. What do you think, Jim?
Well, if you activate anything and your headlights go dim, well, that means that you have too much load on the system and something can't handle it. So this is something that we really need to think about how you're going to approach this. What else is going on, by the way? Is there a big old power amplifier that's running a sound system, a music system that's going on at the same time? Are there other electrical loads that are going on at the same time that have been added to the vehicle? You can actually reach a point to where your vehicle's alternator, which is trying to keep up with all this stuff, can't do it anymore. And then you add something extra like a power window or another motor that will dim the headlights. We've seen many times where if the capacity of the alternator is not enough to run the vehicle's electrical system and charge the battery, then whatever other demand there is on the vehicle's electrical system has to come from the battery. And at night, this is when you really start having these problems because you have lights on and things that typically aren't on during the day. So what I would suggest at this point in time is to have the system checked. There's equipment out there that can actually check the capacity of the alternator, the condition of the battery, and the battery cables and things too, all at the same time. That's a free check. You can have that done at an advanced auto parts store, as a matter of fact. Now, I'm not advocating that this is what you need to do to fix the car, but it is step one to find out where the problem is and what might be causing it.
Well, my first thought was how dim, because as you pointed out, you've got lights on. You're basically loading up the electrical system with high amp loads, such as lights, both in the front and the rear of the vehicle. Then you're introducing another high amp load, like a window motor, into the circuit. So therefore, I think there will be some dimming that happens. Now, how much dimming, it represents whether or not there's a problem, I think, because I think you will have just a little bit, no matter what, even on a healthy electrical system. But if it's severe and like your headlights are going so dim you can't see anything, then yes, absolutely. And the first place I would start is, as Jim recommended, checking out the entire electrical system, the alternator. But everything in the electrical system begins and ends with the battery. And oftentimes that's where problems lie. In fact, anytime there's an electrical problem with a vehicle, the first thing I recommend is checking the battery and its voltage, and also its potential to produce amps in those situations. Because if the battery's not able to keep up, the alternator is going to have to work that much harder to make up the difference. So it's often a good place to start, in my opinion. But the first question that came to my mind is how dim. If it's only a little bit, don't worry about it. But if it's something you're like, hey, that doesn't seem right, then look into it. And Hondas are sort of a special case also, because they employ a strategy to try and save fuel. Anytime you're running your alternator, it's going to put a load on the engine, a mechanical load on the engine. So the more you work the alternator, the harder it is going to be to spin that alternator, and the engine's going to have to work harder as a result. This also uses more fuel. So they employ a strategy where they try to use as little of the alternator as possible, and they use something called an ELD, which is an electric load detecting device. And if that's not functioning properly, then it won't tell the alternator to put out more in a situation where you're hitting the power windows while you've got the headlights on. So that's something else you can throw into the mix as a potential cause. Also connections, the connections to the battery itself, going back to that. If those connections are corroded or not complete, then the battery won't be able to put that electricity out into the system as effectively. So you'll have that barrier there. So you want to have good, clean, tight connections on a nice, healthy battery to start with, and then everything else sort of falls in place from there.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And as I said before, an inspection of the cables along with the electrical components is going to be really important. And you do get a lot of corrosion where the cable is connected to the battery terminal, but also where it's connected to the ground side as well.
Yeah, maybe
perhaps an engine ground. So look for those types of things which may be adding to the problem. I maintain that an electrical system that's in good shape, even though the headlights may dim, it's barely perceivable. And I think that once it becomes more than barely perceivable, there's a problem, I think.
Agreed. And I would just say it really depends on the severity, but that's really subjective. To really know, then, as Jim suggested, perhaps you can take it to advance and they can run that electrical test that he spoke of, and you know for sure whether it was an issue or not. I got one for you, Jim. Jim is a hybrid expert, by the way. And Brian Genter asked, he has a question about hybrid conversions. This seems like a huge untapped market. I mean, I'm an AGI, I'm not real sure what that word is, a 4x4 pickup having the front axle powered electrically and the rear wheels stay gas powered. Mind blown. So I guess the question involves a huge untapped market with hybrid conversions and taking something like a 4x4 pickup and having electrically powered front wheels and gas powered rear wheels. Honestly, I haven't heard too much about hybrid conversions, but Jim, you being the expert in this area, what do you think?
Well, I have seen some vehicles at some of the shows that I've gone to where things like that actually have been done, where you would turn on an axle with an electric motor. The Highlander, Toyota Highlander, by the way, and this isn't exactly what you're talking about, but they do that. Their rear axle has an electric motor on it. So when they want all-wheel drive or four-wheel drive, they just turn the motor on and power the back axle. So these are the types of things that can be done. The components are available in the aftermarket for doing that. And as a matter of fact, if you wanted to, you could just electrically power the whole thing to get rid of the gas engine, because now there's electric motors and controllers available to replace the gasoline engine in vehicles where people want to do that. So your thoughts are good. It is possible. It is expensive. But the components are out there available to do just about anything you want to do along those lines. And it does work fairly well.
Well, I would think in that instance, you're adding a lot of batteries because you're going to need a lot of amps to drive. It sounds like a serious motor to drive an axle to that whole system. So I guess that's where a lot of the expense comes in.
It does, but battery prices are coming down. And some of these batteries that are available to be added to vehicles or to make a hybrid or a battery-powered vehicle, the technology today is nothing like what it used to be. We would actually have a battery that's half the size, for instance, of a Toyota Prius battery, as an example, weighs 78 pounds. But lithium-ion batteries today will cut that weight in half, and in size too. And so those batteries, although expensive, like you say, Eric, are smaller, more powerful, and you can put them in places in vehicles where you just could not do that before. But yep, battery power is going to be required, and you're going to have to control that battery power with some sort of a controller, because you can't just take a battery and hook it to a motor and hope for the best. You have to control that, especially since you're trying to match the wheel speeds front and rear.
Yeah, that was actually one of the first things that came to my mind, and you spoke about controllers. I'm imagining in purpose-built systems or factory-built systems, they use, say, the wheel speed sensors to make sure that the wheel speed is the same, because when you've got a four-wheel drive vehicle, you don't want the front wheels moving faster than the rear wheels. You want them all to move in concert with one another. And in order to do that, they have to know how fast the other wheels are spinning, and then it has to control the current coming out of the motor so that everything works together. If not, you've got basically two vehicles that are trying to do two different things. That I'm sure gets difficult. So In other words, what you're saying, Jim, is it can be done, but it's expensive and you better know what you're doing.
Exactly so. And it's sort of a niche market at this point in time. But if you can get to a battery show or a hybrid vehicle show in different places, Atlanta, Detroit, and places where they have SEMA, as example, is a great place to see a lot of this stuff. You can get your questions answered by people who actually build this stuff, and they can recommend a course of action for you.
There you go. Talk to experts like Jim. I see Mark in here a lot. This is Mark Raul Kuchar, and I probably mispronounce his name each time, but he has a 2006 Pontiac Vibe that's making a wah, wah, wah type noise from the front. What could be making this type of noise?
Well, I just changed a set of tires on a Ford Escape Hybrid, as a matter of fact, that was making a wah, wah, wah noise, and it was a tire. So I suppose it could be a lot of things, but I'm thinking, why don't you start looking at the tires and see if there's a flat spot or something in there, or some irregular wear that you can see that may cause that.
Yeah, first thing that came to my mind. And once again, rotate them. If the noise changes or goes away, then you're most likely looking at an issue with a tire.
I agree.
Easy enough to do. Got another hybrid question for you from Absolute Reality Inc. A 2007 Honda Accord Hybrid. He took the car to change the car battery recently, and the tech at the auto parts store found some codes from the computer that read that all cylinders are misfiring. He also noticed a rotten egg smell and told me that most likely the catalytic converter is in need replacing. I found a couple of products online. One of them I put into the gas tank, and the other one straight through the carburetor that are supposed to clean catalytic converters if they are a little dirty. My MPG has actually decreased since using these products. My hybrid system keeps turning on and off, sometimes showing the warning light on the dash, and sometimes it works perfectly fine, but I noticed that I get about 10 miles per gallon less than I used to.
Well, I assume you're throwing that one right at me, Eric. So I'm going to start off by saying that the hybrid vehicle has, of course, as you know, two power supplies. It's got an internal combustion engine, and it has the electric motor. So the problem, I think, here is not at all in the electric machine itself. This is an internal combustion engine issue. And probably the codes, I'm just going to guess, but I think it's a fairly accurate guess, is a PO300, which is random misfire in the engine. And so you're talking about plugs and spark plug wires, and that type of thing, ignition coil perhaps, or coils. And it's causing misfires that are allowing raw gas to be put into the catalytic converter, which is causing those types of problems. And of course, it's going to soot up your converter and that type of thing. You're going to get decreased gas mileage because you're not burning all the fuel that you're putting into the engine. So I think a good old-fashioned, I guess we could use the term tune-up today, is replace those parts that wear out in the ignition system, and I think you'll see those codes go away.
Yeah, I've also got a few videos on checking misfires, and one in particular that comes to mind is a power balance test. You may be able to nail down a problem cylinder through that, and there are all kinds of things that could cause misfires. It could be an electrical issue such as the ignition system not firing properly. It could be a fuel delivery problem, albeit on Hondas that's not a very common issue. It could also be a mechanical issue, which is somewhat common on Hondas, exhaust valves burning up and that type of thing. But if you're sending raw, if the mixture is not being burned inside the combustion chamber and it's sent back to the catalytic converter is basically like an oven. It's designed to heat up and cause a chemical reaction. If you put raw fuel on that, it's like throwing raw fuel onto a fire, and it can actually heat up exponentially. So much so I've seen them glow red hot and melt internally. So a misfire problem like this, and oftentimes, oftentimes the computer strategy is to limit the engine's power output to try and preserve itself in these instances. So a misfire is something that should be taken seriously, and it could cause more damage down the road, in particular with the catalytic converter. So I would definitely invest some time and effort in finding out what's causing that misfire, and through that, then you will likely solve the issue with your MPG and also your hybrid light coming on and off.
Yep, that's it.
Kevin Boggs, is it possible to remove the head on a 2001 Civic with the intake manifold attached? Thank you. Yes, it's possible. Anything's possible, actually. But honestly, if I was just going to remove the cylinder head, I'd leave the intake manifold inside and attached. You can leave all those vacuum lines, throttle cables, everything attached inside the vehicle and just remove the cylinder head if that's what you're after. There is a bracket that runs, I believe, from the back of the intake manifold to the back of the engine block to get it on there. Although, yeah, 2001, I think you still have the older style, not necessarily a K-series engine. So if that's the case, I'd leave it in there. Just because it's easier to do that, but it's up to you if you want to pull the intake manifold out with it. I just think it's a lot more effort if you're just pulling the head off, then just pull the head off and leave all the rest of that stuff connected. I like to try to work smart instead of hard. What do you think, Jim?
Yeah, I agree. That's exactly what I would do. Work smart instead of hard.
Right. I mean, if there was some reason why you were pulling the intake manifold off, great. But if not, I'd leave it in there. Jose Morales has a 2006 Civic LX. Every time I step on the gas, well, wait a minute. We already answered your question. Why are you posting it twice? That's not fair at all. Here's an old school one. Jeffrey Stath has a 1985 Bronco with a 351 Windsor and a C6 automatic that he wants to restore. I'm going to have to work on the tranny since it has no forward gears, but what would you first to get it safely up and running? That's a loaded question that we could probably talk about at length. Go for it, Jim.
Well, what's not up and running, I guess. That's the thing.
Yep. Yeah, that's the first thing that came to my mind. Okay.
If the idea is just to make it mobile, I know that you can run without all of the gears, just to get the thing to move around. So start with getting. Well, of course, it's up to you, but start with getting it to start, getting it to run, getting all of the nuts and bolts in place so that you have a safe running engine. Now, the transmission thing is going to be a whole nother job. So I think if you're just trying to get the thing to move around so that you can work on it, probably go with the transmission last and get the rest of the stuff going.
Yeah, there's a bunch of different ways you can attack this, and it really depends on the condition of the vehicle. I mean, it's been a long time since '85, and a lot of things can happen. One of the things I find on vehicles that are that old, especially if they've sat for a period of time, I'm assuming since this thing doesn't have any forward gears, bushings. Bushings will dry rot and pretty much go away, and body mounts also, where the body connects to the frame, those can rot away and cause issues. So, I mean, and it being a truck on top of that, it might have been driven hard and put away wet. So there's maybe a lot of issues with corrosions that you're looking at. I think you need to take a good look at the vehicle as a whole and see, okay, is this worth the investment before you start? I mean, if you're looking to restore it, fine. You absolutely love it, great. And then bring it in, pull the engine transmission out, and just go to town. Just do the whole thing front to back. Brake lines also dry rot, crack, and get ugly and old. Calipers, like we talked about earlier in the program, can seize up and cause issues just due to corrosion and just being old. And I believe those Ford calipers don't even use slide pins. It's metal to metal contact in a lot of cases, and you need to take those apart, clean everything up, and lubricate those where the caliper comes into contact with the bracket. I mean, the list kind of goes on and on and on. And your forward gears, why not check the transmission fluid level to start with? Maybe it leaked out, maybe it got low. And if it's low enough, you're not going to have forward gears because there wouldn't be enough fluid in there to move anything on the inside of that transmission. Always start with the easy stuff. Don't try to make it hard. Just, I mean, if your transmission's not working, check the fluid level. And if the fluid level's low, top it off and see what you got. Before you start diving in and pulling transmissions out, it would be a real shame to do that. And all you had to do was put a couple quarts of transmission fluid in it. So there are a lot of options and a lot of things to be considered with this. But when you say restore, that's a loaded question also. How far do you want to go? You just want to get this thing to drive down the road, or are you going to make a show truck out of it? There's so many options. Just depends on the amount of money you have and the amount of time you have to spend spending it.
Yeah, that's right. But keep in mind, as you're moving through this project, the safety, keep the vehicle safe, right. And think about that as you're restoring the vehicle.
Right. That's a big vehicle. It wouldn't be a good thing to lose control of it. All right, I'm going to skip around to people that have recently posted questions, since we've been answering the questions to the people that posted early on in the week. And by the way, I post these shows, or I put these shows up to where you can start posting your questions about a week in advance. Well, the Friday before the show. So if you're looking to get your questions answered, sometimes posting them early works. But tonight we're going to take a different direction. We have Abdul Aziz Al-Shia. Maybe I said that right. Do you recommend sticking a magnet to the engine oil filter, or to trap all the microscopic metal flakes from going back into the engine, like the filter magnet? So they actually have products on the market that are specifically for this type of thing. But I'm curious to get your input on this, Jim.
Well, I was just thinking the same thing that you are. There is a device that goes in between the oil filter and the engine that does that. And so if there is a specific reason why you think you have metal particles that you need to get out, I'd get one of those things right away. But the question I'm having right now is that why do you think that you have to trap metal particles? And if you have a lot of wear, it's probably better to start thinking about getting that stuff fixed first, or second, to try to get the magnet first. But I would recommend buying one of those devices that already exist, and it's a very simple thing. You just take the oil filter off, you screw this thing on to where the oil filter went, put the oil filter back onto this thing, and you're done.
No, I think the magnets that he's talking about actually go on the outside of the filter. You can just take a magnet and stick it to the outside of the metal filter itself.
Yeah, I understand that they do have such things, but I was just looking at these at a trade show very, very recently, and it's just kind of a thin magnet that goes in between the oil filter and the engine. It's pretty slick.
I'm not familiar with that product. But here's my question. Okay, the things that wear inside the engine, bearings. Bearings aren't made of ferrous metal, so putting a magnet on there isn't going to do anything. If you have metal, and also many engines these days are aluminum. So where's the metal coming from is my first question, and how much of it is in there? So if you've got an aluminum engine, yeah, it's got, okay, a metal camshaft, and metal lifters or what have you. Okay, so there can be some wear there. Also, why undermine the already existing filtration system of the engine? I'm not saying adding the magnet is going to have an adverse effect, but they designed the system to work to filter out any particulate matter, not just metal, but just any particulate matter that's in the oil system through that filtration system. So I just think using a good quality filter should get you where you need to be. I'm not saying that a magnet is going to hurt anything, but is it really necessary? I have to question that. And I'm sure there's people out there making these products and things, but if you think about the amount of metal that's actually going to be there inside the engine, and also any stuff that wouldn't get picked up by the filter itself, that's where I'm left sort of scratching my head anyway.
Yeah, I kind of wondered about that too. I mean, the only thing I could think of was things like maybe camshaft lifters, timing chain gears, things like that may be wearing. But yeah, the rest of it, like you say, bearings and the type of things that they put inside of bearings is not going to stick to a magnet.
Right. So yeah, there's a lot of ifs there. I mean, my conclusion is I can't see how it can hurt, but also I'm struggling to find out how it can help. That's where I'll leave that.
Yeah, I think I'd leave it at that place too.
Mike Kelly has a Chevy Aveo 05, or just a Chevy Aveo 5, and now and then during acceleration has a loss of power. RPMs dropped to idle level and no acceleration. This will last for as long as 5 to 8 seconds, and then the power will kick back in, sometimes violently. Perhaps a related issue is that the dashboard clock randomly resets. Aha, I think, yeah, okay. Let me hear what you have to say, Jim, and then I'll weigh in afterwards.
Well, if you have something that resets, that means that we have got a power loss. We could have a bad connection. We could have a communications connection problem between computers. We could have all sorts of things like that to cause that type of a problem. Tracking it down, though, is going to be the chore. And I may be getting too deep in this one particular thing, but we've had a lot of issues with communication between computers on the CAN buses on a lot of these newer vehicles that could cause things like this to happen. And I'm not saying that's what it is, but if it is, you need to actually have a method or be sure someone is looking to make sure that those CAN buses are The CAN bus is the wiring that connects all the computers together. It's just a twisted pair, that they're in good shape, that they're intact, and you don't have loose connections. And it is loose connections at the computer boards and where the cables connect to the computers where these things generally occur. And when we do trace it down to a specific computer in the system, just by smacking the computer can often cause the problem to temporarily either get worse or go away. We look at those things with oscilloscopes, and we can see the spikes come and go as we tap on these connections and things. So that may be part of the problem. There could be other things, of course. I don't know, Eric, what comes to your mind?
I'm also on the same page as far as an electrical issue, but I'm gonna simplify it even more than that. My thoughts are check the battery and its connection. If you have low voltage at the battery, say below 12 volts, 10 volts, maybe sometimes going down to 9 volts, the system itself and those communication systems that you were talking about on CAN bus and things like that cannot communicate effectively. Computers speak in a language of voltage. So if they don't have enough voltage to talk to each other, they can't talk to each other. And when they don't talk to each other, you can have all kinds of adverse effects as a result, because many modern vehicles rely heavily on electronics in order to function properly. So if you don't have a good system voltage to start with, you don't have hope of anything talking to any of the other things like they should. So I would recommend checking the battery and its connections first thing right off. And if you've got a problem in there, address it and it can come back. The fact that your dashboard clock randomly resets says to me that that may be very well be the thing that's going on, because a clock circuit is something that is always hot. And if that's resetting, that I would think goes back to the source, which would be the battery and its connections. So that's where I'd be looking at that. And based on your problem, it could be the transmission isn't shifting properly, or if it's a drive-by-wire system, it's not getting the proper signal coming out of your accelerator pedal, those types of things. So I say start at the battery and its connections and see what you find from there.
Yeah, and I think I'd also check to make sure that the alternator doesn't have intermittent output as well, for the same reasons.
Sure.
And electrical connections that may cause the same sort of a thing, because we know that computers need a specific amount of minimum voltage to run, and when it drops below that, they just stop working, even if it's temporary. And you may get some codes for that. So I don't know if you have a no light on or not, but if you do, I would check it with the scan tool to see if you have any low voltage codes at specific computers in the system.
Or if you have no codes at all, I would definitely be looking at the battery, because if the battery power is disconnected for long enough, all the memory in the computers will be wiped. So if you've got no codes at all, I would suspect the battery even more so at that point. We have time for, let's say one more. Here's a good one. John McLaughlin has a 2001 Citroen. Citroen Same. I don't know if they make a model called that. I've seen it to be losing coolant with no apparent leaks. I have to top it off every few weeks. What could I do to fix this? You want to start with this one, Jim?
Well, if there's no apparent leaks, then you're probably burning it in the engine. So that may be one of the things that you'll have to check, is to find out if, well, where is it going? And if it's being burnt in the engine, then that's kind of a serious issue. You may have a head gasket leak or something like that that needs to be taken care of. So that can usually be checked with, well, different ways. An exhaust analyzer, as an example, will find that out. But one of the things you can do is look at the spark plug or the oxygen sensor, because when you start burning some of these antifreezes, especially when they have ethylene glycol in them, that ethylene glycol will turn those spark plugs and oxygen sensors white. And that's a great indication that you're burning the stuff.
Well, I'm saying, I'll throw in this. If it's only every few weeks, it could be normal. And the reason I say this is coolant is a mixture of water and coolant, and the water will evaporate over time and over different cycles of the vehicle. In fact, during every oil change, I always check the overflow level, and if that's what you're checking, that could just be the normal cycle of the coolant. Like I said, the water will evaporate and kind of go away. So it kind of depends on the severity, but the way I approach these problems is I'll start with a pressure test on the system, and just to see if the pressure drops. I'll put a link in the description to a video I did about this. So if you've got a pressure drop in the system, and usually that pressure test will reveal that leak. If it is, sometimes there's a really small leak in a hose that will sort of heal itself up at colder temperatures, but when it heats up, it starts to spray out maybe on the exhaust, and you might not see it, but you might smell it. Also, there's things like the heater core inside the dashboard. If that starts to leak, you may not necessarily see that leak, but you may have, like, say, a wet floorboard on the passenger side. Well, not really sure if this is European. It could be on the other side or something like that. But also what you might notice if you have a leaking heater core is when you turn on your defroster, there's sort of this milky film, or just a slimy film, that ends up on the windshield whenever you're using a defroster. So that's another potential place for it to leak. But the pressure test will tell you the integrity of the system. And going back to what Jim said about the head gasket, yes, there are ways to verify that, either with an exhaust gas analyzer, or you can also, there's chemical kits that you can get that while the engine is running, you can sort of sniff the air that's coming out of the cooling system, and that will let you know whether or not there's a combustion leak that's happening inside of there. So there are many different ways to attack the problem, but I can't stress enough how it could be normal just based on how much coolant you're quote unquote losing. If it's only like your overflow being low, or perhaps empty from oil change to oil change, it could be a normal thing. So don't rule that out. But yeah, you can do a few other tests, such as that pressure test that I mentioned, to possibly nail down where that leak could be, whether it's something that's external, it's hard to see, or whether it's burning it inside of the engine. And all the things that Jim mentioned as far as the O2 sensor and spark plugs is a really great way to find those internal leaks like that. But I think with that, Jim, unless you have anything else to add to that, I think
not really, other than when you do suspect something like that, obviously pressure testing the cooling system, compression test of the engine, all of those heavy-duty diagnostic things may be required. But yeah, it could be a normal thing. And but one of the things that many vehicle owners can do themselves are things like looking at a spark plug or something where they don't really require any special tools. But I do kind of like your theory about the water evaporating too. That's definitely something that can be happening, and you just kind of watch it for a while and see what you think. But if it continues for, I guess it's going to continue, some sort of a test needs to be made on that. And I would start by something you can do yourself, and then move on from there.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent suggestion and a good way to go with it. But I'm a keep it simple, stupid kind of guy. I don't like to work that hard if I don't have to. So I try to check the simple things first. But with that, we're going to close out this special hour-long show, once again sponsored by Advance. So thank you to Advance Auto for giving us this hour, and also thanking them for giving us Jim Bates and his expertise on all the things that he's brought to the table during this show. Now, below there will be links to additional information. Also, once again, links for Advance, also a link to Jim's YouTube channel, so you can check out some of his videos and things like that. Also, the next show will be, I believe, on the 26th. So if you want to stop back and join us again then, it's quite possibly going to be another hour-long show with Jim. At least that's what I'm hoping, because I don't know, we're having so much fun here, Jim.
Yeah, we certainly are. Let's do it again.
We should. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed the show. Thank you so much for watching. I close each of my videos with be safe, have fun, stay dirty, and also Google+, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. You can find me socially on that, and I'm sure Jim has similar links that we'll put down in the description for you. Anyway, once again, thank you for watching, and take care.